Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Today is going to be a special episode. I found an old recording of a New Earth episode that I did with Gio back in December 2nd, 2020. We invited Professor Julie Artman, who teaches mindfulness in Chapman, to our studio. So without further ado, here goes the episode, and I hope you enjoy.
Hello everyone, this is Gio. Welcome to our podcast, New Earth. Today I'm gonna be talking with Carla.
Hi everyone.
And today we have a very special guest. This is Julie Artman. She's a professor in theater department, but also she teaches mindfulness classes and is involved in Fish Interface Center.
Hi.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for asking me to have this conversation with both of you.
Yes, the class that we took for mindfulness was, as Gio said, it was an eye-opening experience. I'm really grateful for that. So it's an honor to have you here.
Thank you. This is going to be fun.
Yes, it's going to be fun. So, what was the main motivation for creating the class that you created, or your teaching, and how was the idea born about let's teach meditation or mindfulness at Chapman?
Well, this really started with a group of faculty who practice different forms of meditation, whether it's in a non-religious or a religious setting. And with Dr. Gail Stearns, we developed the class, and now we actually have 2 sections of it over an academic year. So part 1 and part 2. And it really takes students through a specific kind of practice, which is mindfulness. Mm-hmm. And I know we're going to talk about mindfulness and spirituality and the connectedness that we all have. I think that is one of the things that I hope we talk about with mindfulness and spirituality, and how this practice can help develop that connectedness that you feel, whether it's within yourself and to other people around you, and what that may help or develop.
Could you tell us a little bit more what mindfulness means to you?
Sure. Well, there are many different aspects of it and definitions. We like to use the definition of paying attention, very simple. Paying attention to present moment experiences with openness, curiosity, and a willingness to be with what is, to be non-judgmental. And this working definition, or expanding definition, if you will, if we break it up into many of its components, it has many different pieces to it too.
Yes, and I think that's a great part of mindfulness, that you can, in meditation as a whole, you can apply it to your life the way you want it to. It's not like just rules that you have to follow.
That's right. We in the teaching, in the instruction, in the exercise, the training, the facilitation of it, we really use it as an entry point, as a way of investigating on our own the way we wish to investigate. I mean, we're given certain tools and techniques, and they're all very helpful. Mm-hmm. And this is ultimately not only to be more present in your day-to-day activities, but also to maybe develop the capacity to be aware of the workings of your own mind, of your own behaviors perhaps, of the thoughts and emotions that come and go, and what are you going to do about it?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you talk about mind and ultimately behavior, to observe our mind. And I always felt like observing the mind and going deeper and catching the thoughts of maybe hatred, maybe fear and stuff like that is the beginning to stop the behavior that probably we saw on Saturday, something like that. And I always think that there is deeper cause to the problem, whatever it might be, than just the material manifestation of the problem.
Yeah. Well, we do say that mindfulness isn't for everyone, and it isn't going to solve everything, all at once. It is one tool or technique. But you mentioned something about the mind and thoughts and emotions. It is really a sort of returning to the embodiment of really the body with the mind. because our body is always present. And that's why the techniques and the tools that we use the breath, we use hearing, we use touch, because this keeps us in the present moment as we do the exercise and the practices. So the body is sort of, again, that path to sort of being here in the moment right now. And as we go with our attention or our mind wandering to all these other things, we decide, are we going to investigate that? Do I really need to think about that right now? It's in my mind. It's not really happening right now. Why don't I return to practice in these moments that I'm going to devote to this exercise? And it is through this exercise of returning and beginning again that this is what has been studied with classical, well, we can call it classical mindfulness technique. This is what has been scientifically studied, and we've seen some demonstration of some health and well-being to it.
That's what also I was going to say, that we actually studied those studies in the class.
Yes.
And like the simple, it's crazy how much effect can simple breath awareness, meditation or mindfulness, whatever we call it, might have. And also I just want to say it's really interesting what you said, that the body is kind of anchored to the present moment, because the body cannot go anywhere else. You just are wherever you are, and the mind is just wandering most of the time, I would say, in the future or the past.
Yeah.
Most of the future.
I think that with the class you helped us return to our senses. I feel like sometimes we prioritize our eyesight as like the only sense that we have, but I remember we did this exercise where we grabbed a piece of a peanut, but it was like,
oh, you mean raisin?
A raisin. We grabbed the raisin and we touched it, and then we put it in our mouth, and then we smelled it, and like it was just really nice to return to those senses and really like be aware of them.
Yeah, and that was a basic mindfulness exercise that's really an eating meditation or eating mindfulness, absolutely, and you can do it while walking. And what we did in the class is we didn't just do a sitting practice, right? We were trying to do other kinds of things so that we can incorporate it daily. And so over time and consistency with the practice, we may notice that maybe we're less stressed, less anxious. You know, these things may come forward as long as we kind of, just with anything, you can't play an instrument in a day. Sometimes it takes time.
Practice.
And even people who practice for years and years and who are very experienced at this, they're still going to have a chattery mind, and they're still going to have all these things happen because we're human and the brain is phenomenal. And so this is just a technique to maybe help us diminish some of that so that we can sort of be here right now.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what the class of mindfulness consisted of for anyone who's listening out there? What would you tell them, like some of the things that we did?
Sure. It's really, it's somewhat based on what is being taught in many universities and colleges in this country and really internationally as well. And it is also part of what is used even in some health settings to help people. And what we do is we actually, again, we sort of define it for ourselves, and we learn what that definition is all about. There's a part of it that is about paying attention to something. We call it an anchor, an object of attention, again associated with somehow the sense or the body, the breath, hearing, touch. And then the other part of that is the awareness part that's going to come in because it's just natural for the mind to wander, the attention to wander to thoughts or emotion. And we notice that, we give space to that, and in the practice, again, we bring it back and we begin again. So we learn the very specific technique of the practice. We also talk about how we might define it as a capacity, an ability, how we can incorporate it into our everyday activities. We did several different exercises. Some of them are just being able to pause when you enter one space from another space. Just be there right now and recognize that. Yeah.
And I really like the one, I also remember another activity that you gave us, like a piece of paper with a bunch of emotions printed out. And like, for example, like sad, and then underneath like a list of ways that people could react to that emotion. So like, imagine for sad, it could be like isolating, crying, screaming, and then you had to highlight like the one that you related to, and it was just like I became mindful of my emotions, and I was like,
Right.
we don't even think about that, you know?
Right. And that is really probably one of the strengths of the practice. If you really think about something that could stay with you lifelong,
Mm-hmm.
that's free, it's always available to you. And as you change, right, as your behavior change or challenges in your life change, here you have a technique possibly for observing, right, what you think about, what your emotions are doing, and what you want to do about it. How do you want to investigate it, right?
Yeah.
What happens in the body? Remember, we also would always return to the body. What does it feel like? And it's okay if people don't feel anything in the body. That happens too. But we sort of observe, well, what does that feel like in the body? And just noticing that can all of a sudden, that emotion that was so strong has changed, it's disappeared, it's decreased, something has happened. And it makes you understand just how emotions and thoughts just come and go. So which one are you going to really hold on to or believe?
With.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
So it's interesting you said thoughts come on, emotions come on, and then you said which one, they're really fleeting. So which one are you going to choose to identify with? And then the issue of kind of identity arises, and the question of who we are, the big question in spirituality.
Okay.
Because if we aren't those thoughts, and if we aren't those emotions, and even this physical body, I would say, then who are we?
That's right. That's a very interesting question. That's sort of advanced intro.
Really advanced, yeah.
Mindfulness. Well, you can think about it in terms of maybe that is part of our challenge for some of us, right? Is that that clinging to that identity when really we're more dynamic than that. And that perhaps if we can kind of flow with a little bit of how things change and that it's okay, then maybe that's a healthier attitude to have. I don't know. For everyone, it's going to be different. The roots of mindfulness, the way we sort of teach it today, as you both know, come from Buddhism. And although you don't have to be a Buddhist to do the practice or to acknowledge or develop mindfulness, it's interesting to sort of use some of the stories from the story of the Buddha in order to understand this idea of how what brings us unsatisfactoriness. Is it the clinging and the craving? What are we identifying with? Who is the me? And is there a healthier way to sort of experience that? These are just some other thoughts as we talk more about the spirituality aspect of mindfulness.
Yeah, I think there's like a balance too, because you're saying that sometimes sometimes we get caught up by an emotion or a thought, but then on the other hand, I feel like sometimes we're also thinking about too much of the future and of changing. So it's hard to find that balance, you know?
That's right. And there's nothing wrong with that. There are times when we need to be angry and we need to be an activist and we need to do things and we are things. So mindfulness isn't about, just diminishing any of that when it's necessary and needed and we want to do it or have to do it. But it is certainly interesting to think about what may be sort of a negative impact on us and what we may want to alter through the practice. And we did a lot of things in the class with that. And we also, as you have talked about, we studied the science behind it and the fact that really in the last many years now, I don't know if it's been like 30 years or more, we've been really studying it, different aspects of mindfulness and what it can do. And because imaging of the brain has become so sophisticated, we can see some of these activations, changes in the brain. And so we're wondering whether, is it sustainable? Is this a practice that we're really seeing this benefit? As you both may remember, some of the benefits in some of the studies we looked at had to do with lessening stress and anxieties, boosting the immune system.
Easier sleep.
And yes, helping you to go to sleep.
Even better grades.
That's right.
Yeah,
There were a few
exactly.
studies that were done with
Yeah.
students that had to do with test taking and GPA, grade point average, or GRE scores, and that it was a helpful technique, because there is the paying attention part, right, which can be very helpful. There is the memory part, there is the learning part, there is the studying part, all those abilities that we need in order to succeed. And then there's the other part that helps us to find the calm or the peacefulness, right? In order to just kind of deal with everything as well.
Before we get to the second part of like the questions, just like, would you want to give the listeners like one quick meditation practice that they could like apply to their life?
Yeah, sure. You know, even sitting for a moment, right, and just focusing on the breath. Right? We don't force, we don't manipulate the breath. We just allow the inhalations and the exhalations to come and go. And even following, 3 successive breaths, again, we get curious about it. We follow it. It's about the qualities and characteristics. We don't tell a story about the breath. Even doing that for a few moments can sort of calm you down a little bit. It may. For some it may not. And that's just one quick practice, right? You can even do that standing in line. We talked about that too. You're standing in line waiting, right? Instead of being impatient, you could just stand there and just be aware that you're here right now in that line, and just kind of go inward and feel the breath in the body. Where are you feeling it mostly? Is it at the nose or the chest or in the abdomen? And then just be there.
But sometimes it's so hard because you're standing in the line and the only thing that your mind wants basically is to just get it done. Just get whatever you're setting in the line for and do the next thing.
Well, Gio, I don't have that problem.
Yeah, the problem.
I love standing in line.
Yeah.
Because I go inward and I really do use those moments. But yes, of course. The mind needs something to do. And
Constantly.
It's busy. I mean, that's what but that's for everything, evolutionary survival, to succeed, everything that we're all about. That's all normal. So we can use the practice in order sort of to redirect the mind to do something else for the moment, so that we can have some kind of a relaxation response. And as you both may recall, we also see through the practice that there also may be an increase in happiness as well. So that's why we get to the well-being and sort of the health benefit from the practice.
Did you see, like, as a teacher, from like your perspective, did you see any changes from like the students at the beginning to like then, like the environment of the classroom?
Well, everybody is so different, and at certain times when we meditated together, yes, I was checking on all of you. That's what we do when we're guiding, and I could see a relaxation response. I could see some smiles that were naturally forming.
Oh, that's
right?
beautiful.
Yeah. So, but again, everybody's different. There could be one or two people who we would share afterwards, and they may say, my mind was all over the place. I was feeling it, and that's okay.
That's okay too.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the acceptance part. That's the equanimity part. That's the balance. That's being okay with whatever comes up.
So the way we got into this class is basically that we tried meditation before and we were kind of interested in spirituality. What about those people who have kind of no idea about spirituality, or maybe those who are coming from religious backgrounds and do not really understand what the spirituality or mindfulness stands for, kind of general understanding of spirituality?
That's really a good question. The way we teach it, since we do it sort of in a everyday kind of thing, and we really, it isn't tied to any, we don't tie it to any religious ritual. Certainly there have been people of many different religions and faiths who've also practiced mindfulness or mindfulness meditation as an additional technique in whatever else may be their spiritual practices. So we talk about spirituality in the class as one part of the class to kind of touch upon, but it is actually sort of an open-ended, right? It's to each person to decide for themselves how they feel about the practice. Certainly people who have no interest in spirituality or no sort of ritualized,
longing maybe too.
Or what was that?
Longing
thing?
maybe too, or questioning for some.
Sure, all of that is okay. So what we do in the class is that everything is accepted, and I think that that's important to know, because certainly we do have classes, right, where we learn about different religions, because that's something we want to study and understand. And in this class, we're really looking at the practice and technique as it is, kind of devoid of that. But since you had mentioned that you wanted to sort of talk about spirituality and mindfulness, because you two were also interested in it, let's first talk about what you think. How do you define spirituality? Let's just talk about what you think that means to both of you.
So spirituality for me really stands for, and if you ask me, religious institutions will not have any place in the 21st century, because I feel like human spirit is too open and too vast to be contained in something, to be contained in a system. And I feel like what spirituality is doing is that giving you all the authority to make the decisions for yourself, and to really choose the spiritual path that you need for growth, or practice whatever is good from every religion, or listen to the wisdom that's good from every religion and really grow. One of the favorite quotes that I love is that it's really not a quote, but what people say, that prayer is talking to God and meditation is like listening to God. And me as a person who was coming from a Christian country, I like, when I first got into meditation, I was like, wow, this is something that everyone needs to do, and meditation is not even kind of allowed by institutional religious elite in my country. And so I used to think, like, what's the point of praying and talking to God if you're not gonna sit down and listen, and if you're not gonna give time to maybe like get in touch with the sacred. So spirituality for me is like universal way of religion, and I think we will see it coming in the world.
Well, you said something really interesting, because when we think of mindfulness meditation, or the practice, or the exercise, or the training, or however we want to call it, really it's part of any contemplative practice. And if you recall, we did talk about how different practices do similar things, right? So prayer or chanting depends on the religion, it depends on the culture. They are doing aspects of the same thing. We just may call it differently. It may come for different reasons. That's why I'm asking about how you think about spirituality. Carla, what about you?
Spirituality for me is believing that there is a greater power that wants to see you succeed and become the best version of yourself. And with that, I feel like I've interpreted spirituality as like kind of wanting to grow and find like a personal development through meditation practices, and just by connecting the mind, body, and spirit. So I think spirituality is more individualized for sure, rather than like a community based.
Okay, that's interesting, because what I was going to kind of contribute to this conversation and say from the mindfulness practice perspective is that while we're cultivating this awareness of ourself and this attention to being present, we're also actually cultivating quite naturally compassion and kindness for ourselves and kindness for others.
Others too, definitely.
And ultimately what happens, and this has also been studied, is that it does increase that capacity of feeling self-compassion and compassion for others, and a connectedness. So here you see where the individual then maybe begins to feel something toward community or the world spirit, or however you want to call it, or whatever, however you want to think about it, that it is perhaps something more than ourselves. And isn't that interesting, that one simple practice can maybe touch upon those other things that can keep us connected to each other in a positive, sort of growing way, and not a diminishment of ourselves.
And this made me think, like, it's interesting because I feel like with religions, it's more like it starts off as a community and you find your own individual practice, while like spirituality is kind of like the opposite. It's like you start alone with your own practice usually, and then you find that interconnected with like the world and more compassionate with people, and so like it's kind of like a contrast, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just
It's
thought
very
about that.
it's very interesting. Absolutely.
What I want to add is that the reason why I think like spirituality should be the way coming to the future is not that I see that religions are gonna disappear. I feel like religious institutions will. So the hierarchy and all the dogma and doctrine will somehow, of course they will not disappear. They're gonna be in the world, but will not be as important to people than actually love, maybe, than actually kindness, actual practice of the teachings that we have to interpret in a different way, I guess.
Yeah.
And
okay. Because you're saying, but who would interpret? Right?
I think individual.
And teach, you would do it on. Yeah.
Maybe
yeah.
I feel like individual, and I always like mysticism, and I feel like meditation really ties into mysticism. It's part of it, because when someone is telling you about what God maybe has to say, it's like, yeah, kind of. But when you do it yourself and you experience maybe peace, maybe experience clarity, then you're like, wow, this works. This actual practice has effects on me, on my well-being and my interconnectedness with the world that I live in. So that's why I feel like individual spirituality is gonna come forth, kind of.
We've mentioned now another couple of things I want to say, that certainly when we look at mindfulness, the way it is sort of facilitated or taught today, especially the way we do it here on campus, is that we are talking about a practice that allows some clarity, perhaps some wisdom eventually. Insight is what we're talking about. We're talking about, and you've mentioned that, it's really about insight. But you've also mentioned something very interesting that I think some of the founders of the contemporary mindfulness movement in this country certainly practice it in different ways. It has evolved, right, to the way we're sort of doing it in this classical way today. But certainly they were exploring the metaphysical aspects of what happens to someone when they're meditating. So it may be that mindfulness becomes a springboard or other kinds of meditation techniques for this other kind of experience. Now, we don't go there, right? We don't go in.
Mindfulness doesn't go there.
We don't go there, but that is certainly an element of what is out there about what people think about meditation, perhaps in general. Some of that. Some of that is.
But now I kind of want to know now, for you, what's spirituality?
Yes, that's the question we have. And also how you got into spirituality. Because for me, I will say real quick, for me, I grew up in a Christian family, but at the same time my family and my parents haven't even read the Bible. And when I was 14, 15 years old, I started questioning, this doesn't make sense sometimes. And they don't even go to church. They rarely go to church. And then when I started questioning, this doesn't make sense, and then I got into meditation, I felt like, wow, this makes sense to me and my mind, actually, and my soul. And that's why and how I kind of switched from religion to spirituality and realized that Buddhism and so many other religions, along with Christianity, has so much to offer. Not only Christianity.
Yeah.
What about you?
I hear what you're saying. Well, I would say that for myself, when I think about spirituality, and I'm still always changing, I think, and discovering new things, at least I hope I am, is that I think about that kind of purpose or meaning, something beyond myself, that connection from the inside of maybe what I am about and to something outside of myself. And certainly it has to do with values and ethics and how I wish to lead my life or live my life. And whether whether it's in a religious context or more of an open context, which we're kind of sort of defining spirituality about, but really religions have spiritual aspects, spirituality, all of it sort of melds together and goes all across what we're talking about. So I would say for me, I probably have always felt that way, and certainly I probably was naturally doing many of those things as a child. And then when I came at it from the performing arts aspect of it, that's my background. And as studying in my actor training program and doing this as an undergraduate and a graduate, that was a technique that was taught. Because again,
really?
Interesting.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So in performing arts,
right.
education.
Because it makes sense, right?
It's
a way.
I feel like it makes sense for everything, but
yeah, especially because you're really dependent on your physical embodiment, right? Your emotions, your mind, your character, your body, yourself, all that stuff. And this is one tool and technique that's very helpful to that process, whether you're a dancer, musician, anybody who's a performer, athletes use it, all all of that. And so it became sort of part of all of that, right? But of course it was so much more than that, than just a tool or technique. And I've used it with actors and things that I've directed as explorations, and I use it as a teaching technique with some of my other classes. And it still kind of is such a wonderful teaching method too, just for myself and for the class, but also just as a way, as I said, how I've sort of kind of lived with it over many, many years of practice individually and also in what I like to do creatively. So it's sort of, to me, it's all there.
It's all there.
It's all there.
And all together.
I hope that kind of answers
a
little bit what you were asking about.
And like how you said at the beginning that we're like always kind of changing our spiritual path, at least for me, because I think with kind of like globalization happening now, we kind of pick and choose what we want a lot, and that's what we're doing with religion.
It's so much better.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's kind of what we're doing with spirituality. You like, for me, personally, I was born in kind of like, my parents weren't really religious, and like they didn't really care about faith or like God. Never mentioned that. But then as I started to get more into Buddhism because of yoga, I like started to read books about like Taoism, Buddhism, and it's so fun that you can like, not fun, but like so interesting how you can grab different practices and different philosophies and just like put them together to fit your own
your soul.
Your own kind of needs, like spiritual, physical, mental needs, you know. It's great. I like it. I wish everyone knew about it.
So I wish everyone knew about it too. So why would you advise people who have no idea, no interest about spirituality to maybe even at least try mindfulness, kind of, maybe do yoga, kind of?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to do it, right?
Yeah.
And, there's so many different other kinds of practices that have elements of it. Yoga is one, Tai Chi is another. There are other aspects of, more ritualistic in Zen Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism, where the practices are different, maybe a little bit different. Again, we're sort of teaching it in a non-religious, sort of in a contemporary way with mindfulness, kind of devoid with all of that. So anybody is welcome. But again, I think those that are interested, they find out and they find the way to figure it out for themselves. And you try it. It's not, as I said before, it's not going to be for everyone. But you try it like any other kind of practice or exercise that you find might be healthy for yourself. So that's maybe what I would say to invite students out there that are listening to think about it.
So this podcast is called New Earth, and we're basically... So we believe that the humanity is creating a new earth, slowly but gradually, a better world, and hopefully a peaceful world. So the question would be, how do you think the humanity is creating the new earth? Or are we creating a new earth and a better earth?
That's kind of a glass half full, half empty question, a big one. I suppose there are those of us that believe there is better or good in the world than there is the other. And, we started at the top with the horrific event that happened in Chabad this weekend. And we've heard of so many, and we're touched by all of it. And it's so difficult to even talk about or say, is there any good, left? What is there? What is the better? And yet we persevere. we help each other. And I would hope that your idea for a new Earth is definitely moving in that direction.
Yes.
And I agree with you that I feel like there's always going to be the good and the bad, because it's like the yin and the yang, you know, like we live in a dual world where there's always going to be like black and white. So maybe to like narrow the question a little, like do you see any like changes from like the younger generation compared to like your generation, like maybe like behavior changes? I don't know, like.
Well, you guys did a podcast about technology, didn't you?
Yeah,
I
we
mean,
did.
just look at your generation and the one before, and even before that, and how much technology and our use of technology has changed the way we interact with each other. What is that doing to our brain and to our development? I don't know. It's still big questions out there. We know, I have seen, you know, studies done, right? We read the reports that say, you know, depression is on the rise, you know, distractedness, you know, inattentiveness is on the rise. All these things are on the rise. Is there a correlation? Some studies have pointed to some of this. So this is part of your generation, right? It'll be very interesting to see if somehow that changes the way you ultimately relate to each other, not just communicate with each other, but truly relate to each other. What is it going to mean for any long-term relationships in your lives? I'll be very curious to hear and watch that. But those are some of my thoughts about what may be major impacts on your generation that haven't existed before, as you both know.
Yeah, a little bit off the tangent. I was thinking about like the changes, and I realized that lately I've been meeting so many people that do like long distance relationships, and it's crazy. Like I literally know so many people that are doing it, and that goes back to like how people relate to each other. Now people relate in a more like technological, like superficial kind of way, you know?
Yeah.
You had to send the letters back in the day.
Yeah.
Well,
if you wanted the relationship.
How many times a day do we just text someone and we never talk to them?
Every day?
And there was a time when, you know, we weren't able to text. We have to talk. So then you go further with that. You had to see somebody, right? And now look how little really social interaction. And just look at how when people get together, the first thing they do is they're on their phone. They don't even take the time when they're in community together or with someone to actually talk with that person for any length of time. Do you remember the study that was the mere presence of an iPhone or a phone? I won't say iPhone, it could be any. That if it was present, meaning in your eye view at the table with your conversation with that person, that somehow it diminished or negatively impacted that conversation. You may not even be consciously aware of it because your focus is split anyway. Right? You're not really with the person. Part of it's still on that device that's resting on the table.
Wow,
Isn't that
you're less mindful.
Also, it's crazy how much, and I'm wearing an Apple Watch right now, and how much worse it makes. And I just wanted to say how sometimes, like when I sit down for meditation, and I started to do it, and I haven't even like thought about taking the watch off maybe to do the meditation. And like in the middle of the meditation, I will start to feel like, do I need to have this thing on my wrist really? And then I take it off and throw it away on the bed. And how close it is. I'm thinking about taking it away, like not using it all.
It's a choice.
It's a choice.
Again, whatever you wish to do as an individual, and I love my iPhone, right?
Oh,
and
me
I love the devices.
But I don't know about the Apple Watch though, because it's like.
I don't know. I'm fascinated by it too.
Too much.
So again, these are choices. For a few minutes, can we let all devices go and just do something else?
This everyone has to try.
Clear the mind, and walking in nature, anything, connecting with nature. That's a mindful practice. That's a fundamental practice that anybody can do, and yet it can be tied to mindfulness.
we're closer to the end of the conversations, but we have what we call soul quiz. So it's a bunch of questions. It's a bunch of questions, and also for the audience, we want to say that these answers are really personal and individual, and we do not think that they are the truth or just a disclaimer. So
Yep.
what's the greatest advice you've ever gotten, and from whom?
Gosh, I can't even think that fast. I've slowed down for mindfulness.
Oh, we got.
We got time.
Yeah, no, we have like 15 more minutes.
Yeah, or we could ask the next
Well, maybe
question.
it's really, to kind of that you are good enough, to love yourself, and that's from every good friend I have.
Yeah, amen. That's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
And I think with mindfulness too, like, that makes you love yourself more
Yep.
because you understand yourself. If you understand yourself, then you accept yourself, and that leads to love.
Yep.
Or at point it doesn't like yours. It makes you not like yourself, but then you realize what to change. So that's the whole point,
That's
right? What is a soul?
Oh, what is a soul? It's a good one. I would have to say at this moment and this time right now, a soul is, well, I'm going to say it is who you are, with everything that you are, and being okay with that, right? The soul of yourself.
Yeah. And what is God?
What is God? I would say that, maybe the simplest thing to say is, God is a creator,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that may mean.
Yeah. What makes you joyful?
What makes me joyful? I'm going to have to say coffee.
Oh, that's
I'm
great.
sorry.
Oh my God.
That's a great answer.
I work for coffee.
Perfect for
It's a
being in
perfect
California.
answer. Yeah, that's a perfect answer. And what's the purpose of human life? And this is the final question. What might be the purpose of human life?
Well,
Because
the one thing I'm thinking of right now again is to help and love each other. To help and love each other. Just think of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
In any way we can. In any way we
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, because sometimes I think to myself that, like, no one will ever have possibly definite answers to why are we here, but at the end, no matter where we are and why are we here, we're all in this together. So maybe let's make it the best we can make for ourselves and others.
Yeah, and just think about how it is, shall I say, such a miracle that we have human life and human existence in any moment of time. Just think about all the things that had to come together for you to be here right now, right? And even here right now at Chapman.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we've mentioned in the past before, like,
Yeah.
we're in Chapman.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And to be able to sort of embrace that, and how fortunate we may be, despite any of our struggles or challenges, as we each have, that we can find moments where we have that, where we have that.
Yeah.
Being grateful is a very big on
Huge.
mindfulness
It's
too.
the beginning, right?
Huge gratitude, absolutely.
Right. Too. I think we're ready to wrap up on a good note of gratitude.
Well, thank you both. This has been great to be with you
Yes, it's
guys
been so
and have
nice
this
talking to you.
conversation.
Yes,
Thank you for coming
and sharing your
Thank you.
perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And also the class for next semester is open. Is it still open?
Yeah, it's for the fall. It's under religious studies or peace studies. It's co-listed as both.
Mhm.
It's introduction to mindfulness. It's one credit,
Mhm.
has no pass, so it's once a week. And
It's simple and enjoyable.
I hope to see some of you who are listening in the
Yes.
class. That would be wonderful to meet you.
Try it
too.
out. Thank you so much for everyone listening. Thank you, Julie, for coming here. We'll see you next Monday. Bye.
New Earth, Mondays at 5 p.m. Awaken the highest version of yourself.
The light and love of divine healing floods into you now.